Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sheen, your host, and today's episode is brought to you by Muzz, the leading Muslim marriage app. Today, we're joined by the incredible Sarah Alagroobi. Sarah is also a host of the podcast called Native Informant. She is the author of this incredible book, and she is a lot of other things, which we'll find out today. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So tell me, when was this idea created? Fire and Silk.
Yes, Fire and Silk. It was a cathartic experience that took place around 2016 and took about 2.5 years to produce. And it went through so many rounds of editing. And yeah, it's been a passion project for me. So yeah.
Well, and other than the passion project, what else do you do?
A Jane of all trades and a master of none. And this is something that...
Do you know the rest of that saying?
Yes. Oh, I always say, but it's not... Oh, yes, I do. Go ahead. Knock yourself out.
So no, you say it. Do you know it?
Yes, I do, but I always forget like the...
Jack of all trade, master of none, oftentimes better than master of one.
Yes.
So there's no problem with being that.
Very true. And I would always I'm a proclaim multi-potentialite. So, you should take that name as well.
I think I should.
It's just, you have the potential to be so many different things, and it's, you're flexible, you're adaptable, you love to integrate into multiple different realms. You have many vertices, you have many trajectories that you go on. So for me, I am an author, a researcher, an educator, an artist, a daughter, and a singleton. So, here we go.
Don't worry, we're here to solve that. But what do you do? What would you say is your current kind of like day job, or what takes most of your time?
So I actually currently just resigned from my job. So
high five.
Yes,
high five.
Don't want to mess up the mic's audio, but I left my 9 to 5, and now I'm just going to start my new venture. And everyone keeps asking me, like, what are you going to do? I've opened a design company because I'm a graphic designer by training, and by training, and I'm just hoping to kind of dip my toes into many different ponds and seeing what happens, and hoping that I can dive in head first before I know how to swim, and we'll see what happens.
And that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
So I quit my job in January this year.
Good for you.
Right.
This is a celebration.
That's what I mean. I feel like everyone asks me, like, would you ever go back? And I say, hell no. There is no going back after this.
Oh, it's too much. It's too much. Especially if you're a person I think if you're a free thinker and you follow the beat of your own drum, and you very much foreground the idea of critical thinking and really kind of diving into aspects of your identity, your way of existence, thinking creatively outside of the box, you cannot be governed by an institution, nor can you be governed by a boss. You have to be your own boss.
Absolutely. And especially when you're creative as well. So, and then that, as you said, once you start getting to know yourself better, you know what matters most to you, right? And it's at the end of the day, it's freedom.
Yeah, it really is. Freedom of mind, freedom of thought, freedom of spirit.
Of time.
Yeah.
I just want to wake up late in the morning.
I feel you.
But also tell us a little bit about the podcast. So the podcast, you told me it's about 7 months now since you started, and it's seen incredible success.
Thanks so much.
If you guys are not listening, please go listen, check out Native Informant. Tell us a bit more about it.
So I have always thought about the idea of starting a podcast. As you can tell, I speak and I never shut up. So I thought during COVID, I was like, should I start a podcast? And it was a question that I threw out to like the general public, because I had a project called the Letters Project for an extended period of time, which was about these kind of sociocultural conversations, starting social discourse, really opening conversations that are not necessarily in the foreground of society, but very marginalized or maybe happening behind closed doors. And I became really fascinated with this idea of it becoming this kind of social experiment, or at least a case study that I could use as like a benchmark to understand our local and regional context, because it's really about the sort of Middle Eastern region. And then I was like, well, how do I further that conversation, and how do I transform that into something that's a bit more long format? And then that's when the Native Informant kind of became an idea, and the rest is really history. So I try to chat with people who differ with me in opinions, but also are like-minded individuals. We talk about life, identity, colonialism, patriarchal structures, but from and within the context of the Arab world and really centering the Arab voice in the conversation.
So I'm guessing you're Arab, right?
I am, yes.
So what type of Arab are you?
What type of Arab I am? I'm not Lebanese where they say they're Phoenician, that's for sure. I am half Syrian, half Emirati. My father is Emirati from Sharjah and my mum is Syrian from Damascus.
Okay, and you've grown up in various different countries.
I have, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I'm sure you are the best place now to tell us, because you just told me you grew up in Brussels, Turkey, London.
Just everywhere.
A little bit of everywhere, but it's also the West and the Middle East and the Arab culture, all of that. How do you think all of these cultural experiences and the way we are brought up, how do these impact how we approach love and relationship?
That's a really loaded question because you can take it from so many different angles. Because I lived in the West and I'm from sort of the Arab world, or, you could say the global North versus the global South. When it comes to dating or the understanding of partnership, it really is a double-edged sword, because you have those that kind of fall on a spectrum of understanding what is their own culture and how they wish to operate it from a collectivist point of view versus an individual point of view. I've always said this on multiple conversations, including my own podcast, that you have high context cultures and low context cultures. And as you move from the West further down to the East, the more sort of high context you become, where you understand the world through, for example, like the implicit understanding of the way that you carry yourself in conversations versus explicit, something that's more sort of uncovered in families and tribes and sort of the collective consciousness versus like the individual. And I think for myself, and I operate from like, I'm the point of origin and everything else departs from that. And I think if you apply that to the idea of dating, in the West, it's very much, I am a sole entity, I'm an individual vessel, I decide my own future, irrespective of how families, traditions, cultures, the wider community will think of me. And when I get married, I marry that person as a sole entity. Whilst in sort of our region, it's very much a collective decision. You carry the family name or the tribal name, and when you quote unquote date, you have to take into consideration the collective consciousness. So you're not dating an individual, you're dating a family. You're going into another world where you're supposed to take on the values and traditionals through a patrilineal legacy. And when you think about the West, it's very much sort of like matrilineal and patrilineal, but in the Arab world, or at least in the South, global South or Middle Eastern region, it's very much patrilineal. You follow your father's religion, you follow your father's last name, his legacy. And so when it comes to dating or the idea of being in relationships, you have those that are influenced by the West that try to pull at the strings and apply certain logics to their understanding of Middle Eastern culture. And sometimes it aligns and sometimes it doesn't. But what I find is, I find it personally really funny, that most people like to take the most extreme versions of the West and say, like, if you apply this line of logic in dating, you're considered open-minded, you're considered modern, you're considered contemporary against the general, dating zeitgeist. And I think that that's just a ridiculous way of thinking. So for me, I kind of oscillate between the two, but I sit very comfortably kind of like sandwiched in the middle. And that's sort of my views on dating when it comes to culture.
I love that. And I love that you touched on the concept of being open-minded. And I think that's something that our generation is very confused about, especially when you look at Muslims or Asians, as you said, people from the global South, Arabs and all of that. We tend to associate being open-minded with being Western.
Absolutely.
Right? Mm-hmm. But then how do we rephrase that, you think, in order to make the younger generations especially less confused about what it means to be open-minded?
Well, the way that I define open-mindedness is very much the idea of, it's self-explanatory. So it's this idea of being open to the idea of things like culture, religion, experiences, ethics that exist outside of your culture that you respect wholeheartedly and that you choose to integrate if it suits you and aligns with your baseline of what you consider to be your moral compass or your ethical compass or your cultural compass. And so the qualities that I really appreciate of the West, maybe not so much now because we are in this strange limbo of humanity and deciding what is considered humane and what is considered inhumane. But let's just say the sort of classical understanding of the West is that open-mindedness was the freedom of thought, the freedom of action, the freedom of speech, the freedom of feeling the way that your thoughts, your ideas, and your way of existence is not necessarily clashing with anyone or bothering anyone, because you have that expansive nature to exist as this kind of soul entity. And so when I think of open-mindedness, I don't think of it like, oh, I'm just partying and drinking and doing the most. For me, it's like I'm willing to sit and have a conversation which is really thought-provoking and quite dense and saturated in nuance, but I can have it with somebody who differs in my experience. And that is I'm open-minded to the idea of having that social discourse. That is what open-mindedness is. I'm not offended by somebody else's thoughts or ideologies. I can accept them and we can find a way to meet in the middle. That's open-mindedness. So you kind of have to apply that same line of logic when it comes to dating. But for them, they think Western liberation is drinking and partying and excess and no limitations and no boundaries and no framework that you have to operate from. And that when you think of the sort of South, it's like oppressive and suppressive and restrictive and governed by so many rules. And so you go from one end of the spectrum to the next. So if you apply that in dating, obviously you're going to think like, I need to be completely liberated from the confines of what we consider to be patriarchal and the destruction of like feminism in society and all of that jazz. And I think just throw that all away and go to the bare bones. Go to like the sort of like, what is it, the etymology of like what it means to be open-minded, and really pull and extract what the actual definition means in various contexts.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that's the main issue is everyone is only listening to argue back. No one is listening to understand. And I think for me, that's what open-mindedness is that being open to being challenged and maybe accepting the fact that you might have been wrong, right? And let's see what other people have to offer. But now let's talk a little bit about more the juicy stuff that we're here to talk about.
That's why we're here. Keep it PG, but we'll see.
Yeah, keep it PG. But obviously before the mics were turned on, we were just talking about how we are, I would say, very late 20s.
Sure.
Like so late that it's no longer 20s. But anyway, so now that we're there, there is a lot of people around us who are getting married. A lot of your friends, I'm sure you as well, me as well. 3 of my friends are currently pregnant, and you start seeing people kind of like moving on to the next phases of life. And now we're not, as you said, we're single as a Pringle.
Single Pringles.
I love that, by the way. So now that we are in this situation, how do you navigate that landscape where people will constantly ask you, are you seeing anyone? When are you thinking of getting married? Are you being difficult? Blah, blah, blah.
Where to go from there? So I had addressed on my podcast, I think it was probably the first podcast I did, where I mentioned a study that was mentioned by Shallon Lester, who is a social media influencer and a content creator. And she had mentioned about a study where it was partnering up with a few universities. I think Harvard was one of them. But the study had 2 phases. And the study focused on a group of men, I think it was something like 9,000 men, where they were examining whether or not men would be comfortable with the idea of marrying somebody who was financially more successful than they were, or somebody that was, let's say, higher on the financial or economic kind of pecking order. And the first phase of the study, all of these kind of men said, a vast majority, I think it was anywhere between 80 to 90% of the men said, yes, I have no problem with dating somebody who is financially more stable than I am, that is making more money than I am, that is more professionally successful than I am. And they, agreed to this idea. Then the second phase of the experiment was to bring those men in rooms with women that were making more money than them, that were in, professional positions that were higher than them, and that were more financially more successful than they were. And within that experiment, it was some ridiculous statistic. It was something like around 80% of the men who originally said that they were okay with the idea of a woman being more successful changed their minds. And not only did they change their minds, they couldn't be in physical proximity to the woman that was making more money than them and was more financially successful.
What?
And they measured the sort of distance. So it was like the further they were, the more comfortable that they felt. So with that experiment, that can give you kind of an overarching idea of what it's like to be a woman who is financially successful, who is independent, who is a go-getter, who's maybe a bit more sort of masculine oriented in terms of being assertive and more go-getting. And I think what happens is women who are more reliant in that sphere, they don't lean in with their femininity, so men don't see themselves reflected in a dynamic with that woman. They see themselves in like, okay, if I'm a man and I want to be in a relationship with you, where am I in this relationship? If you're covering the finances, you're independent, you don't need me to rely on, I don't fit into this kind of structure that you've built for yourself. And so I don't have a role to play, and therefore I will feel emasculated. I will feel insignificant. I won't feel like I have like I have nothing to contribute to the conversation. So I think that's why women within our sphere who are intellectually stimulating, great with their finances, trying to make grinding as hard as they can, men just kind of stay physically away from us because they feel threatened by it.
So then how do we fix it?
It goes back to what I just said in the sense that we have to get to the root of it. Like, we have to understand that we are also the problem. Mm-hmm. We have to be accountable for that. If we are the common denominator in this story, we have to figure out, okay, why are we like this? And it goes back to childhood. It goes back to our, inner child, our shadow self, in the sense that we became this way because there wasn't a great masculine representation for us to model ourselves against. Either we wanted to be that or we wanted to be alongside that. Either you had a father that was very, assertive and go-getting, and your connection to said father is to be just like him, to model yourself against that person. Or you didn't have that great model figure and you wanted to be the polar opposite of that. Either way, you are resuming and embodying the masculine energy, which is assertive, go-getting, domineering. You can compartmentalize. You're more logically and rationally thinking in terms of the mindset. And also you have, because of that, you move towards masculinity and you move away from femininity. So to resolve that, you have to lean into the feminine. You have to be fluid. You have to be open and receptive to this idea that you can lean on someone else to provide for you. You can find that individual. You can carve out a place for that individual to exist in. You can fall into the femininity or that feminine energy. But women who do that, it's a defense mechanism. We don't lean into that because we're like, well, I don't feel safe around you. How do I know that you're not going to deliver what I expect you to deliver? But then you flip it on its head and you look at it his point of view. It's like, well, how do I know that you're not going to be so independent that I no longer exist in your life? Mm. So it's a double-edged sword. I think women have to lean in more into the feminine and men have to lean into the masculine.
So do you think that feminism is really ruining our
Absolutely. I hate feminism.
Right.
Third wave, all the waves.
All of them.
All of the waves. And I spoke to my friend Layla, who you had on your podcast. And I think that society really cheated women in convincing them that they are, like, it is their world and everyone else orients around it. That the whole purpose of the divine feminine energy is to be open, to be receptive, and to be giving. We are like a flower in bloom. We open. And so if you are asking a woman to close herself in the sense that, no, I could do it on my own. I'm going to be independent. I don't need no man. Like all of this kind of hashtag boss bitch energy, what that does is it shields away a woman from being her true divine self. And it also shuts her away from the possibility of being open and receptive to a man that's willing to come in and compliment her. If you're not allowing that man to come through, it's because you're putting off this energy that, like, I'm sorry, but I'm, disinterested in what you have to offer. So I'd rather be quite self-serving and quite narcissistic. It's like, it's all about me and how I feel and my needs have to be met, and hashtag free, whatever. And it's just, It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous because that's not how ancestors lived. That's not how my grandmother was or my great-grandmother was or my great-great-grandmother was. They were in these dynamics with men that maybe were, because of survival, but they also respected one another and they knew their role.
Right.
And I think that was something that because we drank the Kool-Aid. Layla and I spoke about it. We drank the Kool-Aid at one point, and feminism is literally the destruction of our society. Forget the West. I don't care about the West. They have their own problems and what they deal with. I'm not interested in that.
I agree. So that I've had the same conversation with Layla, right, about feminism. And because when I invited her on the podcast, she was like, I don't like feminism though. And I was like, yeah, don't worry. This is not what we're talking about. Because so now, if we love what you said about the gender roles, the traditional roles, especially when we're looking at our societies, not the West. But take us, for examples, right? So we've obviously been educated. We're highly educated. We are highly skilled. And now we have this like public perceived success, right? You have a book out. We have podcasts out. Everyone knows us. So then how does this go in line with the narrative that you just explained to us, right? Because you said, it's not even about us being go-getter. Like for me, I'll be very happy for someone taking care of me. I'm only doing it because I have to.
I know, but do you lean into that? Do you lead into the idea?
What does that mean? Tell me.
You just said that I'm only doing this because I have to.
Yes.
Why?
What do you mean? Why am I doing it because I have to? Because I come from a little island and I wanted a better life for myself.
Okay, so you're taking on the role of the masculine energy.
Yes.
So you're leading with that because you are trying to survive.
Yes.
It's like a defense mechanism. So how is a man supposed to know that you're doing this because it's a need for survival?
Right. It's not.
So what you're doing is you're mirroring him. So he's out there grinding, being assertive, being go-getting, being goal-oriented, like all of that kind of solution orientation mentality. But if you're leading with that as well, he's going to think, oh, so she's already resolved. She is resolved as she is. So the way that I think about it is that, like, what kind of energy am I putting out there? I don't know if you agree with this or not, but it's like the most, I guess you would say, like, masculine, I put quotations, masculine aspect of myself is that, like, I don't take shit. Like, I really, really don't. And I am very black and white. And I think of things mostly in a logical and rational way rather than in an emotional way. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens is whenever I get into conversations, the first thing that someone will say to me as a man is like, Sarah, you're really intimidating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so what is the intimidation that's coming out of it? Yeah. Because I'm coming in where it looks like I'm ready to go to war, he's got his guard up as well. Yeah. So he's like, why am I competing with her? Because naturally a man is going to compete. Like when a man is like around other men, he'll puff up his chest because he's sitting there and he's like, who am I going to fight? Who am I going to take down?
Yeah.
But if he's doing that against you, then he's going to go, well, hold on a minute. This doesn't align with me. If I'm supposed to court her or I'm supposed to sort of save her or to take care of her, why do I feel like I want to compete with her? So you're going to get one of two paradigms. You're going to get a man who feels inadequate, so he's going to like back off and he's not going to puff up his chest in front of you because he doesn't want to beat his chest like a caveman and say like, okay, I can't compete with her. It's too much for me to handle. Or you're going to get a guy who is willing to take on that challenge because he can see through the facade because it's a mask you're wearing. Right. We wear these masks. Yeah. I think it's honestly because you have not met a man where you're willing to take that mask off or you're willing to let your guard down. You will naturally fall into that feminine energy when you meet someone that is already giving you that safe space to put that guard down because it's a defense mechanism. You have to do it. It's like survival of like the fittest. Yeah. And instead of being the person that's kind of like nurturing and taking care of whatever you have, you're like the hunter. And I think, I genuinely believe that you have not been enmeshed with the right energy that's willing to meet you on that level where they're going to look at you and they're going to go, I see the facade, you can drop it now. Where you kind of go like hard and you're like arguing and you're ready to have a debate. And he's like, okay, are you done? You having a good time? Do you feel better about it? Do you want a back rub? Yeah. Do you want some hot chocolate? Like, and you're like, yes, Yeah. And it's only a really like astute, intellectually stimulating man who is comfortable in his own skin, who is grounded in his sense of faith, his sense of identity, that will be willing to orient himself towards your direction.
Right.
Yeah. And they are few, far, and in between.
Yeah, where are they?
It's not very common. It's not common, unfortunately. It's because we are of a society where women are becoming more masculine and men are becoming more feminine. And we also come from a society, whether you want to mention the global south, where men are coddled constantly by their parents. So they lean into this idea of like, I don't have to put in effort. I don't have to do anything that I'm not required to do. I can have a partner that isn't my equal. I have a partner that is my mother, and I'm just marrying my mother, or I'm getting enmeshed with somebody who's a motherly figure, and we have a parent-child dynamic. And I've said this to friends as well. It's like you have three types of, let's say, dependency. You have codependent, you have independent, and then you have interdependent. So codependent is obviously you are very reliant on this person. This person is fulfilling a need that there is a lack in you, that you need to be satiated, or you need to have a supply of some sort. You get validation from that person, and you cannot really exist without that validation. It's a toxic dynamic to be in. It's also a very anxiously attached dynamic to be in. But those are the ones that gravitate. People who gravitate are people that are not very self-actualized. They're not very resolved, and it triggers them, or it dips into an aspect of their character that they wish that they could resolve, but the resolution is within themselves. It's not within the partner, and then that creates a codependent dynamic. Then you have the independent, where it's like, I can do everything on my own. I don't need anyone to bother me. When I resolve things, I self-soothe. I don't need my partner to come and help and console me. I will resolve it myself, because as a child, you were not given the safe space to be able to openly discuss how you feel. So you're like, I'm fine, I'll deal with it myself. And you create a distance, and you cannot really connect or unite yourself with this individual. And there's always just this strange barrier. And often it could come from very masculine orientated women. Like, we don't allow for that release. We don't surrender to that idea. And then the last is interdependent, which is where we always want to be, where it's like, I'm happy to exist as a sole entity, but I'm also great when I'm together with you. And those people have to be secure in their attachment. They have to be self-aware. They have to be self-actualized. They have to know thyself to such a degree that their sense of identity, their sense of religion, their sense of the way that they carry themselves is so grounded and so rock solid that nothing can else faze them. But unfortunately, that is so hard to come by. It really, really is.
Exactly. So I feel like we all know what the solution is, but I feel like in the practical terms, it's really hard, right? I'm sure even you've experienced it, but like on a day-to-day basis, like how often do you think, like, do you strongly believe he's coming?
Yes.
You do?
I have to.
You have to?
I have to have a strong sense of faith, because I've said this on multiple platforms, and including my own. I choose to orient my life, especially after the current situations that we're witnessing around the world, the sort of devastation of Gaza. I've really turned inwards into my religion and turned upwards to the higher power. And it was something that I really navigated my life around, religion, but it was only after October the 7th that I really entrenched myself in this like unshakable belief system that there is a higher power. This higher power is God, and God will guide you down the path of righteousness and will never sway you from what is intended for you. And I always believe that if I had gotten married when I was younger, I wouldn't have been ready. I feel like I'm at a point now in my life where I'm so self-actualized that God will send the right person that is there for me. And I know that the people that I was, either in relationships before or people that I had seen as potential partners, they weren't the right fit for me because I wasn't as self-actualized as I am now. And I can continue to grow. But God has basically told me, whether it's in my prayers or in my belief system, it's not your time yet. It will come. And we have to believe that. We have to believe that as people who believe in a higher power, your time will come. And right now, God is kind of like shifting you or like pivoting you in a direction where it's like, focus on other things. Right now you're dealing, and to be honest, and this is something that I was really thinking about, I had been in a job for almost 10 years. I was exhausted. I was I didn't feel like I was growing. I didn't feel like I was recognized for what I was bringing to the table. And it was just such a drain and a burden on my back. And when I finally made the sort of executive decision to leave this job, I felt like there was a lightness. Like I felt like I no longer had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I told a friend of mine that, I don't think I'm ready to be in a relationship up until now. I was always trying to force it and I was like, why? And getting into this kind of pity party. But then I realized I'm only now ready because I'm in this mental clarity where everything is at my fingertips. The world is my oyster. There's so many different opportunities that just kept coming. As soon as I clicked the resignation button, all of a sudden I started getting calls left, right, and center. Things started happening. And I was like, this is all God, alhamdulillah, But then I was like, I think only now am I in a position, because I am open, that I'm ready to receive. I'm ready to receive this individual that energetically I wasn't in line to receive before. So now whatever was clogging my judgment, whether it was like really bad energy, whether it was just being blocked, whether my throat chakra, my sacral chakra, my whatever chakra you want to throw my way was blocked, is now I feel a lightness. I feel like there is like an ethereal haze that's just kind of overtaken me and I'm willing to receive. And I feel like for you, if you're in a position where you're constantly chasing this thing, it's not meant for you because you're chasing it. Right. It has to come to you naturally. And every battle that we're faced with, we cannot apply the same line of logic to the way that we are business oriented and we want to go and we want to attract. We cannot apply that same line of logic for something that is already intended for us. But what we can apply is the same amount of energy and time we dedicate in so many other things. We have to apply it into dating as well. Like a friend of mine said to me, she's like, if you put even 10% of the energy that you put into your podcast and your research and the book that you did, if you put in just 10%, you would have already found a partner by now. Exactly. And I was like, no. And she said, yes. And I was like, oh yeah, you're kind of right. And I think there's a fear. If you haven't put that same energy into it, like really, you sit there, you strategize, you've got a whiteboard, you're like, okay, where am I going to go? How am I going to meet people? Where am I going to find intellectually stimulating people? There are book clubs, there are amazing concerts you can go to, there are exhibitions, art exhibitions, there's places that you can go to, friends of friends of friends. Put in that energy, make a roster, and actually go out there and be like, I'm going to put in the same energy I put into my podcast, I'm going to put it into freaking dating, and see what happens and see what.
I know I had someone on the podcast who talked about this, how one of their friends, she did that. She actually went on an app and decided to schedule 3 dates a week for 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And how did that go for her?
And she didn't like any of them that way romantically. Mm-hmm. But at the end of that, she met someone else who was a neighbor of one of her friends, and she's now married to this guy. But it's just putting yourself in that mindset and being open. Now you're fully open to anything that's coming your way. And I guess it's also, as you said, the energy that you now give off when people meet you. So I agree. I completely agree. And I think there's a big fear of rejection as well, right? So which is why people don't want to do this, because no one likes to be rejected.
Yes. And what's also unfortunate, Sheen, that our whole lives we were taught that in order to be desirable, we have to come from a good family, we have to be well-raised, well-traveled, well-read, highly, highly intellectually stimulating, and that will suffice to find a partner. And that is the biggest lie that feminism has ever told you. It really is.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, are you joking?
It's the biggest lie. But it took us going through our entire early adolescence into our teenage years, into early adulthood, into our 30s, that, that we come to that realization that we have all the skills that can prepare us to be soul entities and men, that we can lead the charge, but we're women. So why? Why are we doing this? And yes, we have to provide for ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves, but we have to be willing to know when we switch it off. And it's interesting because one of my friends who is very assertive, go-getting, domineering, all of those things, quite disagreeable by nature, she had a really difficult time finding a partner. She ended up finding someone who was about 10 years older than she was, who is not threatened by her in the slightest. Like actually laughs whenever she sits there and she's like, and I want to do this. But everyone that she had dated before that had always been someone who was just as go-getting, just as assertive, just as this. And the person that she was looking for is also go-getting and assertive, but is not driven by the same need to compete. And I think that, I mean, granted, she met him at a wedding, but that's like, I mean, you got to travel. Use those well-versed, well-raised, well-traveled, well-read, aspects of yourself to find yourself a good partner, and you will. And I think the people that I used to attract, it's interesting. They were not necessarily men that wanted to be with me. They were men that wanted to be me. And I'm going to break that down for people.
Please.
They were men that were challenged by my intellect and found it really enticing and really exciting. They were also challenged by the way that I look, by being a fantasy rather than the reality. So it was always seen within the context of a challenge. Like, can I get this person? Because she's a fantasy. She's something that is unattainable. Versus, can I challenge her in conversations? Can I beat her in this like tug of war of our professional ability to like persevere and, dominate and whatnot? And so the reality is that I figured out, it took a really long time, and I was like, they don't want to be with me, they want to be me. And it's like this, and the reason why I knew that is because I did everything in my power to make them more well-read, to make them more smarter, to be more, let's say, like emotionally astute. And you like groom them to do this, and you like take care of them, and then the next thing you know, they're like, bye, and the next person they date, they marry. And it's like, you basically...
We are a grooming school for husbands, aren't we? I've been the same.
Every single person that I was in a relationship with ended up getting married and having 2 kids. Like, literally after. And I was like, did you just, when Harry met Sally me? Like, I made you. I made you. I literally made you. And then they went on to be really great men that were just not right for me. And it was because after that competition fades and the dust settles and it's a calm before the storm, and you start to see the reality of the situation where it's like, okay, I'm finally you. I'm finally on your level.
I'm there now, yeah.
I don't need you anymore. And it's like, for me, I'm always like, okay, if you're gone, stay gone. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. But I think it took a long time for me to realize that I wasn't the problem, because I kept going like, why does those happen? It's because they gravitate towards that energy. It's like, it's the same, and not necessarily the same, but it's the same type of energy that men gravitate towards women who are very promiscuous. It's like they can smell it from a mile away. Like they look at the girl and they're like, oh, she's damaged. I think I can take her on. They can see themselves within that dynamic. And I've had multiple guy friends tell me, they were like, Sarah, like a man thinks in a way, like they kind of put you into 2 boxes. It's like, do I want to lay down with this woman or do I not? It's as simple as that. And also, if I do, how much effort do I need to exert in order to get to that stage? Like, how many obstacles am I going to get to that level before I can crack that code? And if there's too many obstacles and it's too complex in nature,
it's not worth
that's when they turn around and they go like, you're too intimidating. It's like, well, no, you're just not up for the challenge, my friend, And I think that's the case, because the women that I know that end up becoming, or the women that I know that are in relationships that are toxic, where there's like loads of men and they don't want to settle down with them, it's like, what is it? Is it just like an air about me? I'm like, you were too available, and they can smell it literally off you. They can smell the pheromones, and that's just the way it is. It's the same way they can be intellectually challenged is the same way they can physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever, disarm you. Either or. So
going back to how we are Bob the Builder, right? I feel like this is one thing.
Can we fix it? Yes, we can.
We can fix anything.
Yeah.
Anything. And that's the thing. I feel like you were holding a mirror to me, because I've had the same issue. And I've never thought of it this way of they're trying to be me, but it is exactly that. And especially in my experience, it's always opening them up emotionally.
Oh, yeah.
Because the EQ was 0. And then you spend time with them, you teach them, you mend their relationships around them. And then suddenly now he's like, okay, well,
I'm resolved. Thanks so much.
thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Not so much as a thank you card.
Absolutely.
Nothing. And immediately after, the next person they find, they get married. And you're like, wow, okay.
But then it goes back to our nature by people who are problem solvers.
Yes.
You see a problem in this individual.
You want to fix it.
And you want to fix it. But you're not fixing it through your inability to connect with your emotional intelligence. And no. We are above that. We have elevated our level of consciousness. Now we are teaching you to self-actualize. We are here. We need you to get up here with us. Yeah. Women that try to kind of resolve these men who are not self-actualized, it's always like this tug of war where it's like, I just want you to like help me and I want to help you and you're damaged but I can fix you kind of situation. But the truth of the matter is that people who are self-actualized, they will want to resolve this because it feeds into the ego. It feeds into our self-validation. That if we are able to elevate this person's level of consciousness, we have won. That means that if there's ever an argument or any disagreement of sorts, it's never because you weren't on your form. So in a way, it's the same way that certain women and men create problems in relationships and then they just distance themselves. So when the relationship ends, they are never accountable for their actions because it's like, well, it wasn't me, it was something else.
Yeah.
So I no longer am the person to blame. Take it on that flip side. If you're a person that can resolve problems and you gain validation from that and it feeds your ego, that's what you're going to seek in that partner. It's like, I've fixed you. Now everything's going to be perfect. Yeah. When you realize, no, it's not, because they've already self-actualized. They don't need you anymore.
I know. And again, this brings us to the conversation we were having initially where like type A women and type A men kind of like there's a mismatch in between of our expectations and what we're looking for, especially when it comes to marriage, right? Mm-hmm. As you said, like type A women are the ones who are looking for someone who's on their level. Mm-hmm. But type A men, they want someone who's going to be a cheerleader, someone who will, see them as being something better than they are. So now they want everyone but the type A woman. Mm-hmm. So then how does this mismatch, how do we solve this?
The problem is that I think the dating pool, like online dating pool or intersexual dynamics when it comes to online dating is the death of all that is known to be like neurotypical. Because what ends up happening is you have men that have never been able to be accessed by certain types of women, all of a sudden have an entire plethora of women in front of them that they serially date. So it's like, I'm not going to be dating one person, I'm going to be dating 20 people. If you want to cheat on someone, you don't necessarily have to leave the house. You can just do it online. So that overindulgence and excess of having women that are open and receptive to date this person, a woman will focus on one individual. So you will get man number one, who is dating woman 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, rather than the traditional way, which is man number one dates woman number one or woman number two, and then man number two dates woman number 3 or 4. So in the end, you have this high count of women that are gravitating towards this one individual who is never going to marry them. And they spend so much time and effort and dedication to this individual. And then this individual gets to just pick from the cream of the crop.
Whenever he feels ready, he'll just pick whatever
he wants. And it's probably not going to be the people that he's dated. It's probably going to be a woman that's who's 22, who is really young, who's really fertile, who is none the wiser. Mm-hmm. And that's the person that he's going to pick. Versus women who want to find a person that is on their level. You have this kind of strange spot. And I spoke to this with a person I interviewed called Dr. Vincent Haranam, who focuses on these types of intersexual dynamics, and he writes loads of papers on it. And he said that you have this dynamic where all of these men have so much access to women, and these women are focused on this one individual man, and then all the years go by when your sole dedication is to this one individual, that 1, 2, 3, 5 years have passed, and you're past your prime. You're no longer that fertile, or you're no longer that desirable. You don't no longer have the best, you don't have that sort of peak desire of fertility and youth anymore. And so that biological clock has sailed. And so you have these women that are in their late to mid 30s that have no husband, that have no children. And the only thing that they have going for them is the fact that, yay, I managed to get promoted at work, so good for me. And it's because they spent their entire life treating the dating pool like a job. And that's just not how it is. And it's unfortunate, because then you have women who are 20, 21, 22, who are none the wiser, that men are very interested in, because they are so naive. They're so innocent. They give the impression, it could be a false impression, but of purity. And so they look at that and they think, that's the one that I want to go with, because I can assure myself I don't have to deal with all of the baggage that age brings to the table. I don't have to deal with the pressure of having to fertilize, because she's not on a biological clock. She's literally in her infancy when it comes to that. And also she looks really good. So I know that she's never going to challenge me on anything. And she has the physical appearance for me to be attracted to her. And these are only men that consider themselves high value. I'm not talking about men who are just your run of the mill, because the run of the mill guys is it's fine, it's Adi, whatever. But these high value men are going to be wanting the best of the best. They want the cream of the crop, and they will have access to them. And high value women are just not that way, because a high value man is disinterested. The contemporary way of understanding high value man is disinterested in the contemporary way of wanting a high value woman. So yeah, it's crossing over.
Because someone asked me this question, and they were like, have you ever met a power couple in real life where you thought, okay, both of them are incredibly well achieved and they both support each other really well, they're both on the same level? And I really struggled to think about it.
I've never met anyone
It's not real. Again, another lie that feminism fed us. You can have a power couple, but as you said, as you just explained, the man in the power couple doesn't want the woman.
Because I think when you think about men, and I interviewed someone called Corey Lindsay. He had this platform called Mentality, which focused on mental health awareness for men specifically when it comes to the dating sphere and things like that. And he just said something really interesting. He's like, men want peace. That's all they want. They want to be in a relationship with somebody that isn't going to challenge them. And this is not to say that they have to be with some dumb or dim-witted woman that's never going to have an intellectual conversation or isn't going to challenge or debate them. They just want to be able to have peace of mind after they're grinding all day, to come home to a good meal, to love, to tenderness, to family, to something that's situated in the right place, so they don't have to overly exhaust their cognitive ability to string a sentence together after a long day of work. And men are vilified for wanting that. And this is the same way where, we have these ideas of oh, well, I need a man who's 6'4" or whatever. And it's well, a man goes well, I need a woman who's this beautiful and this and this and that. And they're like, well, I can't believe you just said that. It's well, you want a man who's 6'4". So for me, I always think that both dynamics have to reassess their positioning and figure it out. And I don't think that a woman has to settle. I really, really don't. And I think that is also a lie that feminism sells you as well, where it's it goes to one extreme. It's I hashtag don't need a man at all. Or it's your standards are too high.
Yeah.
You need to lower yourself and lower your expectations, babes, because you're probably not going to get the guy. It's which one are you? Are you the one that is I don't need a man and I can do everything myself and women empowerment and hashtag girl power? Or are you the woman that eventually succumbs to this idea that she will never be anything more than what she is, and she needs to lower her expectations and her desires, because as her biological clock is ticking, her level of desire is slowly but surely diminishing? Pick,
I know that's the problem. And I think the whole idea of bringing your standards down, right? And this is an assumption that people have around us that, oh, her standards are probably too high, she's not interested and all of that. But the reality is that, as you said, it's just, there's a lot of mismatch, and the probability of you finding a guy who ticks all the boxes, but who's also geographically somewhere around you and is bound to like cross path with you is very low. So it's
really difficult. And unfortunately, places like here are governed by this idea of you're kind of living in a transient space.
Exactly.
People come in and come out. So people don't necessarily want to make roots in a place like this. So you will have to run the risk of meeting someone that is going to have a short window of opportunity and then eventually leave. But I don't think it's far-fetched. I don't think it's out of reach. I think it's very possible to find someone. I just think, how much energy are you willing to put into it? How much energy are you willing to exhaust from everything else that you're working on to really dedicate yourself to finding a partner? And it's not like you're missing anything. You're beautiful, you're successful, you're young, you are very intellectually stimulating, but you need to stop leaning into the masculine, because otherwise it will be the death of womanhood if we keep leaning into the masculine. We need to be able to be comfortable to like be open and smiley and receptive and just like draw that energy in, draw that attention in. And yeah, any woman that tells you like, yeah, you just gotta like grind and be a boss bitch, like, it's a lie. It's all a lie. Young Gen Zers, it's a lie. Gen Alpha, it's a lie.
Oh my God, we've reached Gen Alpha now.
Yeah.
What the hell? Okay, so we're going to move to our little segment now, which is the fun part. Quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode was brought to you by Muzz, which is the leading Muslim marriage app. And if you are also looking to meet your future spouse Islamically, privately, securely, you can go on the app, you can download it. I'll put all the description in the link and the links in the description box below. So please check it out. There are over 10 million single Muslims on the app. So if you're looking for love, that might be it. Now I have a question for you.
Sure.
When you think of these marriage apps like Muzz, what features would you want to see on the app that would make you want to use it?
I think that it depends. I think you should have options to be able to decide how culturally open and receptive you are to the dating sphere. For example, there are some people that feel really comfortable with anonymity or not showing photographs, et cetera, et cetera. Those are for the people that are a bit more on the conservative side. Mm-hmm. But then there are those who, for example, are very open and willing to put photos, be a little bit more interactive. I think voice notes on apps are really interesting because you get to hear the person speak, you get to understand how they think. I think questions that are a bit more philosophical or a bit more rooted in spirituality are really important. Like, I remember there was an app that was like, what's your favorite color and why? And I'm like, yes, from like a psychological point of view, that's very interesting. But it's like you want to get to the depth of understanding this person's character beyond the facade, because an app is so surface level in general. So how can we grab aspects that are a little bit more nuanced? Mm-hmm. So I would kind of want something like that on an app, that there is a range of level of conservatism versus, liberal's the wrong word, but just a bit more on the modern side.
Yeah, I love that. Now we have a fun one, which is it's called the red flag, green flag segment.
Sure.
I'm going to throw sentences at you.
Everything's a red flag. No, I'm just joking. Okay, go ahead.
One guest said everything was a red flag.
Okay, we'll see.
Okay. Number 1, he wants to live with his family long term.
Orange flag.
Okay.
Because I don't think there's anything wrong with someone still trying to work on their business, to work on their future, and that they want to live with their family. I think that it's culturally acceptable in some places, and I think that that's totally normal. I have a few friends who live in their respective partner's family home. But then I also think that it's important to have a sense of individuality. Yes, we are part of a collective culture that allows for family to be sort of like tribal or culturally orientated. But I think it's important to take a step away from that so you can carve out your own individual home. So that's why I say an orange flag.
Agreed. Now, he's a 10, but he's very active on social media.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
You don't care?
Yeah.
Okay.
Green flag,
Okay. He's a bad texter, but great communicator in person.
I think that is a red flag because the initial stages are always texting. So if you can't come through with texting from the get-go, I always find that a little bit problematic. I want to know how, like, words are very important to me, and I think that communication is very important. So if you're a person that lacks that kind of skill, then you need to kind of improve it. And also, I am very much of a firm belief that, like, you don't love someone the way that you want to love them. You love them the way they want to be loved. So if you are with a person who says, I kind of wish that you would text me a bit more, or if you were a bit more lengthier with your responses, et cetera, it is your job to do what that person wants, because you're loving them the way they want to be loved, not the way that you want to love them.
Agreed. Now, he has a great sense of humor, but he cannot take a joke.
Oh, red flag.
Right.
Red flag. Like, if you can dish it, but you can't take it, no, sorry, red flag.
And also, roasting someone is my love language.
Yeah.
So, please.
Positive words and negative words of affirmation.
You get all of it.
Let's go.
Okay. Is a born flirt and can't help it.
That's a tough one. That is really a tough one. Because I think people can be flirtatious by nature because they're just like, they're kind of charismatic, interesting, enticing, vivacious, all of those different things. And it can be misconstrued as flirtation. But I think it depends on the partner. So if you are with a partner, once again, who feels uncomfortable with you being a little bit too extroverted or too vivacious in the way that you carry yourself, or even slightly suggestive when there was no intention to be that, then that is your responsibility to be able to rectify that. Agreed.
Now, which one are we going to throw at you? He's a mama's boy through and through.
Oh, that's a tough one, because I feel like mama's boys get a bad rep because I think it's really important for a man to have a very close relationship with his mother, to love his mother, to respect his mother, because then by extension, he respects women, and by extension, he respects womanhood in general. But if he's too much of a mama's boy where he's coddled and he's like a child that is in his perpetual state of infancy, no, that's a red flag.
Agreed. And I've had experience with that. For me, that's a red flag. Okay, final one. He promises marriage and the whole 9 yards, but is hesitant to talk to your dad.
No, red flag. Are you kidding me? Then what's the point?
He's promising it.
No. You need to be with a man that has made the decision that you are the one that he wants. No ifs, buts, or maybes.
No.
That's it. He's pursuing you. He is showing you how assertive and go-getting he is. He has an aim and a goal, and that is you, and that's it. And if he has to bypass mama, baba, like the whole 9 yards, then so be it.
That's it.
Like, what's the point then?
I know. And I guess final question for you is, you've already dished out a few, but what is your advice to people who are currently looking to find their partner? What advice do you have in terms of how to approach it?
I think, once again, the way that you are good at strategizing, you have to apply that same line of logic of strategy into your dating life. You need to figure out exactly what you're looking for, because there's a lot of people that have a rough idea of what they want. And I would throw out an exercise. And I spoke to a friend about this actually recently, where I was like, okay, put a list of 10 things that you look for in a partner, okay? And then every day, remove one of those things from that list. And then ultimately, you will get to 3 main things. Those 3 main things are your core values that are unshakable. What are those things? Because if you lead with that, then anytime you get into a conversation, anytime you're meeting somebody, that is going to be at the frontal lobe of your existence. So you will automatically know that if they don't showcase that, and then I'm disinterested in taking this any further, because that's my non-negotiable. You have to decide what those non-negotiables are, because if you have a standard, you have to hold yourself to that standard and then hold your partner to that same standard. So if you don't have that standard outlined, then you're already shooting yourself in the foot. So that would be my advice.
Yes, solid advice. And to be fair, I've been given that advice before as
I
well.
need to take it myself.
I've come up with my 3 now. I have my 3, and I'm like, this is it. 3 things are, number 1, for me, religion is very important. So someone who's a practicing
same.
Muslim, right? The second thing is kindness.
Yes. And Layla and I were talking about this as well. Yeah, kindness.
It's so important. Like I think younger me never appreciated how important it is for kindness. And the third thing is someone who has ambition.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't care how early on you are in your journey of that, but you need to be someone who is working and who has a vision in life.
Absolutely.
And working towards something.
I agree. And I think it's just so tough. It's so hard to meet individuals that way. I
And
think
it's so basic.
you think it's basic, but unfortunately, if you're a person, if you're a guy, and this is not to shoot men in the face about this, because I genuinely believe there is a war against masculinity, and I'm very much fighting for both men and women in terms of the way that they're represented or misrepresented in contemporary society. But with men, if you are of a background where you never had to be accountable for anything that you had to say, or you never had to justify your position, and it's as simple as like, I'm going out with my friends, where are you going? Okay, have fun. Like that type of parents who do that, then they really don't have to put in that extra amount of thinking or that extra amount of effort into really carving out the type of people that they want to be. It's only through like serious trauma that they actually like kind of come out the other end where they're like, I am reborn, I'm a phoenix rising from the ashes. So I think that's when they put their best foot forward. Not to say that they all have to go through trauma, but it's important for them to self-actualize, but they have to have a drive to do it. If they don't need to do it because they never had to do it when they were younger, it's a hard pill to swallow, but yeah.
I agree. And true final question.
We're just going to keep going. Yeah.
I just remembered, and I was like, this is something I really wanted to talk to you about, you know, because in today's time, when you look at the statistics when it comes to divorces and relationships that are failing, it's incredibly high. And even me, in my very short time in adulthood, a lot of my friends got married and got divorced.
Same, yeah.
So it's a little bit scary to think that how is this happening more and more now? And what do you think about this? And and I guess we are still looking for a partner. We still believe in it. So how do you kind of like converge these two different narratives?
The people that I knew that got divorced actually knew post-wedding that the marriage wasn't going to work out. That was the truth. They realized that when they were in relationships with partners, some of them took the conservative route by having it more suggested and arranged rather than it being sort of a more kind of contemporary way of looking at things. But the ones that did on both ends of the spectrum, they didn't really know themselves. So they weren't able to see themselves reflected in their partners because they were growing not in parallel with each other, but like completely different directions that they couldn't like overlap or Venn diagram their experience. And I found that when they finally realized who they were able to find partners that they actually thought that were right for themselves. They were either too emotionally immature to take on those relationships. I think you have to be a whole human because you need to figure out what you're bringing to the table. And when you are just searching for that one person that's going to complete you, you've already shot yourself in the foot because you don't need anyone to complete you. You need to complete yourself and hope that you can coexist in this kind of Venn diagram that I keep referring to.
I love that. I love that you used it as a verb as well. You can't Venn diagram.
Yeah, you got to Venn diagram yourself.
You got to do it. Yeah. But no, this was incredible, Sarah. I think this is part
Thanks
1.
Thanks so much, Sheen. Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to do a part 2.
Yeah.
I learned so much from you. And you know what, this series, I've realized that a lot of times I'm just actually learning so much. And I love how people are very openly sharing all of these.
We don't gatekeep. We said this literally before the podcast started.
We don't gatekeep. And I just hope that this is useful for all the young women out there watching us as well, and young men, whoever wants to take any
both
advice.
Of you guys. Feminism is a lie.
Yeah, we're here to help everybody.
Yes.
But amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.